I have an update on the local prison system in Marseille, otherwise known as the Football Club of Marseille. Some crazy drama has happened in the locker room, and you know, it has to be crazy if Marseille is reacting to it, because Marseille made essentially like 2 years ago, it seems, they made the educated decision to just sign people with checkered pasts as a value proposition, which, you know, economically speaking, I can respect. But I think if we're in a situation where Marseille has been made uncomfortable by something, then clearly that something was incredibly bad. Because there is a threshold at Marseille of being able to tolerate things that would usually make people uncomfortable, right? Just in terms of the guys that are in the locker room. Everybody knows about Mason Greenwood, right? Obviously, the charges were dropped. The guy is not, in prison or being pursued and being in prison. He exists, but the point that I have always maintained around the Mason Greenwood situation is even though the charges were dropped because essentially they didn't want to press charges anymore, and I don't know what's going on, in their relationship, but I would be uncomfortable interacting with the guy. I would. We all saw the videos, or we all saw the pictures, we all heard the audios, whatever, right? I would be uncomfortable interacting with the guy. Do people deserve a second chance? Yes. Is the due process of law always important? Yes. But there is a difference between that and being uncomfortable interacting with somebody. But it's not even the only person at Marseille, right, that is involved in this sort of stuff. And I hate going there, but I'm actually going to go to the Daily Mail because for some reason they're the only person that wrote an article that actually summed this up in the way that I wanted to be able to sum this up. They also had Eli Wahi, there was an investigative report that came out that Eli Wahi was involved in doing some really heinous things at his secondary school, like, forcing multiple kids in his class to go into the bathroom and undress and then do stuff, right? Like, again, the sort of stuff that when it comes out in a report, I would just be really uncomfortable interacting with that person. Unless there is a public sort of full circle retribution sort of thing. This video is not about that. I'm just bringing this up for people that maybe aren't aware or didn't know the full scope of those sorts of things. Or Marseille also tried to sign Benjamin Mendy after he went through that kind of lengthy court process with his rape case, or his rape cases, plural. He ended up signing with a different team in France. They weren't able to get him, but that's something that Marseille has done. And the reason to bring it up, the reason to talk about it is because Marseille has been made so uncomfortable by this incident that happened between Adrien Rabiot and this other guy from the English youth national team that they have decided to put them both on the transfer list. Right now, apparently, right as I'm putting this video together, Fabrizio Romano is tweeting that maybe that is not the case, but I'm going to paint the picture for you. I'm going to use an article from The Athletic based off the things that I've seen. They kind of do the best job of painting that picture. There are two people involved in this story. That would be Adrien Rabiot and Jonathan Rowe. Well, Adrien Rabiot is the more recognizable name. He's, been to World Cups, played with the French national team for a long time. Big coup for Marseille to be able to sign him. And in some ways, Rabiot fits right in, right? He has not had issues in his past of a sexual nature, like Mason Greenwood or Eli Wahi, right? But he has been involved, he's somebody that seems to run against the grain, right? He has been antagonistic in his relationships with previous clubs. He maybe has a bit of an ego problem. I don't know. I've never met the guy, right? But there is clearly something kind of almost in the Jose Mourinho way where he just chafes against places that he's at for too long. And Adrien Rabiot now headed to Marseille kind of just makes sense, right? It's the home for misfit toys or toys that generally make you uncomfortable and you probably wouldn't want your daughter to date, right? I don't know. So Rabiot goes there. Jonathan Rowe, who is a kind of a sub for Marseille, is on the team as well, but he's starting in this opening match. The opening match does not go well. They end up losing. They lose 1-0. It's a match that they absolutely should have won. They were playing Stade Rennais. They lost on like a 90th minute goal after dominating everything. Stade Rennais had 10 players for an hour, right? They got a red card earlier in the match. But this story has nothing to do with the actual match. It's the locker room afterwards. And here is everything we know about what happened. Tempers flared in the visitor changing room with senior players, including Adrien Rabiot, but not limited to, right? They also mentioned Geronimo Rulli by name, going after Jonathan Rowe for a lack of effort. So the issue here is that Jonathan Rowe apparently has been displaying a lack of effort. And Adrien Rabiot is not the only person to be voicing this concern, right? And this is also, I'd like to point out, not an unusual conversation. If you lose a tough match like this, you're playing against a team you're better than who is also down to 10 men for an hour, you're usually going to have this sort of conversation in the dressing room. Somebody fucked up, somebody didn't play well, somebody didn't try hard enough, and you're going to try to kind of go at that person. The problem is Adrien Rabiot apparently took it too far. Apparently took it way too far. All right? Rabiot subsequently found himself in a sustained physical altercation with Rowe, during which the France midfielder struck him in the face. Amid the confusion, 17-year-old midfielder Daryl Bacala collapsed and had to be treated by the club's medical staff. Now, that is very careful journalistic wording. Don't know if he was involved in the fracas, if he tripped, knocked himself out, if he just passed out, he was too tired, he was dehydrated. We have absolutely no information about that, right? It took the intervention of security staff for order to be restored. So we're looking at a situation where they're going at Jonathan Rowe, and then for whatever reason, I don't know if Jonathan Rowe's talking back, I don't know if Adrien Rabiot just woke up on the wrong side of the bed and his Wheaties were soggy this morning. He decides that he is going to get in a fight with Jonathan Rowe. And it is a sustained brawl, right? As is made very clear as we kind of talk about the rest of the situation. It is nasty, whatever happens. There is not a ton of detail about exactly what happened, but everybody that seems to have witnessed it was basically in shock at the level of violence they saw from Adrien Rabiot and Jonathan Rowe. Okay, it clearly at some point Jonathan Rowe gets hit square in the face. Maybe that's how it started. Maybe that was just something that happened along the way. And we got another guy that needs to be treated. And the team and the coaching staff can't separate them. They have to get the security staff to come in to actually manage to separate all of this. That is, for me, a very important takeaway. Other players in the squad were shocked by the level of violence involved. Marseille president Pablo Longoria described what happened as an incident of extreme seriousness and violence, something unheard of. And this is perhaps the really telling quote. Roberto De Zerbi, who of course is the coach of Marseille, has been coaching for 13 years. Director of football, Mehdi Benati, has been in top-level football since the age of 22. And I started in professional football at the age of 20. I think that the three of us have enough experience to say that we have never seen such a thing in a changing room. Longoria, however, the guy that actually said this, clarified that he did not directly witness the incident himself because he's currently banned from the changing room for accusing League One referees of corruption last season, which, nice. But Benatia and De Zerbi did see what happened, and they basically echoed the same thing. I mean, they literally used the word echoed in this article. It was chaos. I've never seen that. People might get worked up, but you can't go as far as physical attack, a punch in the mouth, security having to come in and split you up. Benatia also says that it got worse because neither of the players apologized for their role. The first time I was kind of reading this, and this wasn't even the only article I read, right? There were tweets and stuff as well, reporters that were around, involved, to talk to people. That Adrien Rabiot was the aggressor here. Clearly, he was the one going at Jonathan Rowe. But the more and more you read about this was some sort of mutually assured destruction. Adrien Rabiot and Jonathan Rowe both did a lot of nasty shit here. There really is not any effort by anybody that saw or interacted with this situation to separate Adrien Rabiot from Jonathan Rowe. It's the two of them. They both were, I don't know if this was some sort of 5-round UFC fight night top of the card bout where, they were going to their corners and reloading and then coming back in. One guy was working the leg kicks. One guy was trying to turn that into takedowns. I don't know. Right, but there was a lot of give and take going on because it's remarkable how much of an effort is made to not separate Rabiot and Jonathan Rowe when talking about this. De Zerbi also expressed his full support publicly, saying in a place of work you have two employees punching each other as if they were in an English pub with a teammate on the floor because he's lost consciousness. What should an employer do? There are two solutions, either suspension or dismissal. Then what they basically did is came out in after, a couple of days of discussion, a couple of days to let it simmer, a couple of days of neither of these guys apologizing, either publicly or privately, apparently, for what happened, they came out and just transfer listed both of them, which is an insane step. I mean, these guys, particularly in Rabiot's case, are worth tens of millions of dollars. right? This is, outside of the personal ramifications of violence in the workplace, a massive financial decision. This is not a decision taken lightly. These are not two players in the youth academy that maybe could be worth $100,000 for you, right? This is a French World Cup winning international, right? And a guy that scored the winning goal, I believe, in extra time for the English U21s at the U21 Euros, like a guy that's clearly a rising star in the sport. They're happy to have him on the, both of these guys, millions with an S, is what you're looking at in terms of a transaction. And you are giving up an asset of that value for, changing your whole plan, your years-long plan of what your team is going to look like because of how bad this was. Like how irredeemably bad whatever happened to the locker room was. I mean, there are reports that this fight lasted 10 minutes. A 10-minute street fight, even after separation, both kept insulting each other, according to Romain Molina. Crazy. I mean, absolutely insane. Maybe the best part, though, right? As much as I'm highlighting how far over the line you have to go from Marseille in particular to do something like this, to not want to work with you, to look at their locker room with the guys that are in there and look at that and go, yeah, we can't have Rabiot and Rowe in there because that's going to be too much of a problem. That's going to make everybody too uncomfortable. The best part of the story outside of that is, of course, that Adrien Rabiot is one of those players whose mom is incredibly involved in everything. She's his agent. Veronique Rabiot, she said, when Mason Greenwood signed after hitting his girlfriend, De Zerbi said he could be given a second chance. I agree with second chances, but would my son be the only one not entitled to one? I kind of respect it. I kind of respect this because she has a point, right? I mean, you probably shouldn't just be punching anyone. Right, but there is a more valid justification, as far as I know, for punching a teammate right after a loss when the emotions are incredibly high, and it's two dudes compared to what Mason Greenwood was like caught on photo and in audio doing. Right, like obviously you want to live in a world where none of that shit's happening, but Adrien Rabiot's mom kind of sticks this. Right? She is a shit stirrer. She always has been. And sometimes that is a good thing. The world of sports doesn't really exist without these types of people to stir the pot and really kind of needle everybody. And she has certainly contributed to Adrien Rabiot's rambunctious career. But I am surprised by that. And that's where this is not as much of a surprise. Roberto De Zerbi coming out saying, despite what happened, I hope we can fix the situation with Adrien Rabiot. No mention of Jonathan Rowe. So this is a classic situation, perhaps, where Jonathan Rowe is more expendable and Adrien Rabiot is more valuable, and you are realizing that you only need to get rid of one of them because they clearly have a blood feud, and you can't have both of them in the locker room, but you probably can have one of them because, it's Marseille. But your first, middle, and last takeaway from this is that everybody that seemed to have witnessed this said it was remarkably violent. So violent, in fact, that Marseille, no question, transfer listed both players 48 hours later. So whatever happened between Adrien Rabiot and Jonathan Rowe is a very rare occurrence in the world of football. It was beyond the normal scope of competitive nature, even, David Beckham, Sir Alex Ferguson, and throwing a shoe, right? This was something on a completely different level. And we may never actually know kind of exactly what happened.